really quickly here. And I'm going to see if that shows up through in the Facebook. Really quickly here. And I'm going to see if that shows up through in the Facebook. Well, it sounds like it showed up in the Facebook and we can hear it. Really quickly here. And I'm going to see if that shows up. Okay, so there we go. It looks like we're able to bring that audio in as well. Like it showed up All right, so we're going to disconnect there. We're going to go back to the business at hand, right? So today is Citizenship Day. We're talking about the new test. So first, let's go to what's going on in the world and why we have to deal with this. Well, first, let's go back to, there was a video I made not too long ago called dealing with Project 2025. I'm just going to pull these off real quick. Now, when Donald Trump was running for the presidency for the second time, he pretended to not know anything about what's called Project 2025. It's essentially where all the old members of his administration wrote articles about how they would do things differently if they were all elected again or put into power again. And so, of course, immigration was a huge topic. We did a video on that previously. You can find that on our site. And one of the things that they wanted to do is tighten up citizenship. They want to make it not as easy to get. Okay. Now, we could debate for a long time whether that was necessary or not. And I can tell you, people don't just get citizenship willy-nilly. Okay. Having represented thousands of clients who've applied for citizenship, I can tell you that if they don't speak English, and they need to for the test, and if they haven't studied, they're probably not going to pass. Okay. So the question is, how hard do you want to make it for someone to become a citizen? If we should be generally accepting of people and new immigrants and granting them the full rights and privileges of citizenship in the United States, well, we want a test that's going to screen people, right? Do you know anything about the country that you're becoming a part of now? Do you know anything about the responsibilities and rights that you have as an American citizen? If that's the level that we want to admit people as citizens into the United States, well, we've had a really good system for that already for years. So essentially, there's a bank of 100 questions, have to do with civil rights, have to do with civics, have to do with history, have to do with the Constitution. And out of that bank of 100 questions, the examiner randomly chooses 10. Now it's a computer system that will randomly choose 10 of those questions. And those questions are given to the candidate for citizenship. And if they can get 6 of them right, just one more than half, well, then they get the right to become a U.S. citizen. Now, the test is just one part of the process of becoming a U.S. citizen. It's not just anyone who's here can take the test and become a citizen. No, first you need a green card. You need to have it for at least 5 years, 3 years if you're married to a U.S. citizen. Okay, but at least have it for 5 years. Speak English, understand, speak, write, read, converse in English. And then, of course, pass the test, which we just discussed. Now, that's not it either, right? You have to pass background checks. Immigration is going to dig into all of your past and find out if, when you got your green card, if it was legitimately given to you. They're going to check your criminal history. They're going to check everything to make sure you're not a terrorist, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, they don't want people who have criminal records or should be removed becoming U.S. citizens. So there is a pretty high bar that's already set. Now, in Project 2025, I believe one of the topics, or at least among those who want to influence the Trump administration, there's a hard right conservatives who say, and in the real sense, they are conservative because they want to conserve America racially, socially, economically, sort of as it is, and want to avoid what they termed the great white replacement, right? So if people are coming in from other countries, they'll end up replacing the majority of what we have here today, okay? Without respect to, so they're not looking at whether we share the same values. They're looking literally at a skin color and a culture that they see is threatened. So one of the things I want to do is limit how many people can get access to U.S. citizenship and become full members of United States society. Welcome, Camilla Overmeyer, 87. I see you there. I know that you're a frequent viewer of ours as well. So we hope you enjoy the stream today. Again, we're talking about citizenship. If you would like to join and ask some questions, I'm gonna invite you if you want to do sort of the multi-guest thing once we get into some of the details here. So I'm gonna shoot that invitation out right now. Well, let's keep going. So essentially, what happened is the other day, the USCIS published a notice in the Federal Register saying, "Hey, we're going to change things now." And so that's part of the official procedure to change the requirement for the citizenship test. So why don't we jump to it and see what it says? I'm just going to pull up that window here. So it gives a little background on that. And this is actually something that they tried to do. I'll just pop back here. This is something that the Trump administration tried to do their last time around. So 2016. And then 18 is when they were able to start something. And it was only enabled for a brief moment. There were lawsuits challenging it, and the way that they tried to do it, the lawsuits were successful. So ever since then, we've not had to deal with updated citizenship tests, but they're doing it again now. They're trying to follow the procedures correctly. And I guarantee there are going to be lawsuits from immigrant advocate organizations and attorneys because it is really putting an unnecessary burden on immigrants who want to become U.S. citizens. And let's take a look at why that is the case. So there's some of the history there. This is the official notice. So, just skimming here. USCIS is making a modification in the administration of the test. When it was implemented in 2020, officers were required to orally ask all 20 questions, regardless of whether the alien had already answered a sufficient number to pass or fail the test. This was a change from the 2008 test. And again, it makes sense that you would not need to ask all 20 questions or all 10 questions if you've got enough of them right already to go forward. There's no reason to embarrass or shame someone if they can't get even more of them right, because they got enough right to pass. All right, this is the only difference from the 2020 naturalization civics test. Okay, so therefore, when an alien answers 12 questions correctly, the officer will stop administering the test. Similarly, when an alien answers 9 questions incorrectly, thus failing the test, the officer will stop administering the test. Okay, so that is a procedural change. So it looks like they're not going to keep asking you questions once you got enough of them right or wrong to pass or not pass the test. Let's see here. I want to see, because there is a 20. Yeah, here we go. So instead of 10 questions, there's going to be 20 questions. Instead of having to get 10 of them right, you need to get 12 of them right. 12 out of 20. Okay, so something slightly more than 50%. Now, some people may say, hey, this is great because there were some really hard questions. Maybe it gives you a chance to get some right when you wouldn't have gotten them right before, but that is certainly not the intent. They've added 28 questions to the bank. So that's an extra 28 questions that any citizenship candidate is going to need to study in order for that to work, in order for them to pass. Let's see here. I'm just sort of skimming some of these other things here. All right, now here's some important application notices. Aliens, so this is immigrants. Of course, they're going back to calling them aliens because apparently we live in the 1910s. Aliens who have already filed a naturalization application or who file a naturalization application less than 30 days after this notice is published in the Federal Register will take the 2008 naturalization civics test. That's the shorter one. That's 10 questions, get 6 of them right, okay? For those who file a naturalization application 30 days or more after this notice is published in the Federal Register will take the 2025 naturalization civics test. With respect to those who qualify for special consideration because they are age 65 or older and have resided in the U.S. as a lawful permanent resident or green card holder for at least 20 years, USCIS will continue to administer a test with 10 questions from a specially selected bank of 20 questions from either the 2008 or 2025 naturalization civics test. Okay, so you know what? That's good news. So for individuals who are at least 65 years old and they've lived in the United States as a green card holder for at least 20 years, because of their age and their time here, they get special consideration. They don't have to know as much. They don't have to study as much in order to pass the test. There's less for them to study, but they'll still need to get more of them right. Yeah, 10 questions. So they'll still have to answer 10 questions and get 6 of them right. And most aliens who will be subject to the 2025 naturalization civics test. Oh, you know what? We can show this. I'll show you what we're looking at here. Most of the aliens who will be subject to the 2025 naturalization civics test will not be tested until at least 3 months after the publication of this notice, including delays. That 30-day delay before the use of the test, along with timing, is going to help to sufficient notice for aliens applying naturalization to prepare. Okay, so they're saying that there is a delay in implementation of 30 days, so those who already had filed and are going in expecting to take the shorter test can still take the shorter test. But after that 30-day delay, no. So I think this is another technique that the Trump administration is doing to try and make themselves lawsuit proof, because they can say, no, we considered it. We gave everybody who applied 30 days grace period, so we thought about it and therefore should not violate the Administrative Procedures Act. Right, where if you go do something arbitrary and capricious as the government and you're not giving due consideration, it can be ruled, your action can be ruled unlawful and it can be reversed by the court. So they're trying to avoid that this time around. Okay, so we're going to be looking at the longer naturalization test again. And again, this was published September 18th, 2025. Now, let's do a calculation of timeanddate.com. We're going to go here and we're going to calculate from September 18th. So we need to pull up a little calculator here. Calculators. Add September 18th. Sorry we're doing this live. We're eating up a little bit of time, but I'm getting ready to answer your questions as well. September 18th, 2025. And when we add 30 days, here's the deadline, October 18th. So if you file your citizenship application before, well, let's reread the rule because they were very specific here. I don't want to repeat it just based off an assumption. So let's go back here. This is how we do things as attorneys. We look closely at dates, etc., to make sure we're right. So aliens who have already filed a naturalization application or who file less than 30 days after this notice will take the 08 test. So you'll take the shorter one. So if you file your citizenship application before October 18th of 2025, you take the shorter test. If you file your application on or after October 18th, 2025, you will be looking at the longer test. Okay, so advice. Yeah, and we were, just to give you an idea here, this is what we're looking at. We calculated 30 days after September 18th, which is when it would publish, would be October 18th. So file it before then to avoid taking the longer test. And of course, here's the public register notice, the Federal Register notice, where that was announced. Okay, so USCIS is mentioning this. You know, we have information in the Citizenship Resource Center. We can go to study materials for the test. And let's see if they've released, because there's the 08 test study materials. Check for test updates. Let's check here. Of course, there was that executive order, implementation. There's going to be the new version, 25 naturalization test. And here we got some test updates. Okay, so here's some additional questions that you'll need to know. Naturalization civics test updates. No, these are the questions that already exist on the test. I recognize them. The answers will change. So that's what we're seeing here. Who is one of your state's U.S. senators? Of course, that can change every 3 years because every 3 years, one of your senators will be voted out. Your U.S. representative, that changes every 2 years and depends on where you live in your state. The name of the Speaker of the House of Representatives right now is going to be Mike Johnson. These are the acceptable answers here, right? The name of the current president of the United States, there you got it. Vice President, J.D. Vance. The Chief Justice of the United States now, that continues to be John Roberts. And the governor of your state, of course, that answer will vary depending on the current governor of your state. Okay, so those are the updates, but the new bank of the questions for the 2025 test, the longer test, are not released yet. Now, while we're talking about citizenship, let's go to exceptions and accommodations. So as you can see here, we're sharing some information. We're going to talk about the exceptions and accommodations for the citizenship test, because there are some individuals who are exempt from taking either the civics portion, the English portion, or either together, right? So there can be a number of reasons for that. So we're going to take a look at some of those reasons right here. You can see under exceptions and accommodations. Let me make this a little smaller just so it fits better on the TikTok stream here. In fact, what I'm noticing is I can actually, if I move this over, oh, wrong stream here. Let's move it from here to here. I'll make it a little more centered. Okay, I'm actually going to grow it a little bit just so we can see it better. Okay, so as you can see here, we do have some exemptions that deal with the English language. All right, so if you are 50 years of age or older at the time of filing for naturalization, so when you file that application, if you're 50 years of age or older, this can apply to you if you've been a green card holder for 20 years in the United States. Okay, so that's the first exemption. You're 50 years of age or older, and you've been here for 20 years as a green card holder. You do not have to do this in English. You can take the whole test in Spanish. You still have to take the test, but you'll bring a translator with you, and you have to bring your own certified legal translator. It can't be your attorney. It can't be your cousin. It can't be your daughter, friend, family member. No, you need a certified interpreter for this. If you are age 55 or older at the time of filing for naturalization, and you've lived as a permanent resident for 15 years. So let's reemphasize that. You're 55 years of age, and you've lived as a green card holder with your residency here in the United States for 15 years. You also do not have to do this in English. You can do it in your native language. Again, you bring your own interpreter. That will be on you. If you don't bring it, they could fail you. They could let you come back one more time and try. But you need to bring your own interpreter, and then you can do it in your native language. Okay. Now, you still have to take the test, right? So you still got to answer those questions, but the interpreter will be there only to translate. You can't look at them and get a hint, get help, nothing else, right? You can't bring in a cheat sheet. You still have to take the test. There we go. So let's go to the last exemption that has to do with English. And that's what we sort of touched on that already. If you're 65 or older, okay, so 50, 55 now, if you're 65 or older, and you've been a green card holder for at least 20 years, you get special consideration regarding the civics requirement, which just means they're going to give you fewer questions that you need to study. You still have to answer 10 questions, but out of 20, there's 20 period that you got to study, and there's only 10 that you're going to have to answer and get 6 correct. Okay, so it's easier due to age. Now, those are not the only ones. There's also medical disability exceptions, and let's get that rolling here so you can see that. Okay. You can be eligible for an exception to the English and civics naturalization requirements if you're unable to comply with these requirements because of a physical or developmental disability or a mental impairment. So, Attorney Betzold, what does that mean? What is considered a physical or developmental disability or a mental impairment? Well, let's talk about those one at a time. First of all, a physical disability or mental impairment. Okay, it can have anything to do with any of those recognized physical disabilities that interferes with your ability to pass the test. So, I broke my leg. Does that change whether I can take the test? No, that's not going to count. I feel tired today. Is that a disability? No, not by itself. But a physical disability could include, for example, if I have a client that comes to me and says, Attorney Betzold, I have a disease with my kidneys. My kidneys don't function correctly. I got to go in for dialysis all the time. And because I have that issue with my kidneys, my blood doesn't get filtered correctly. It does affect my cognitive performance. And because of that, I can't learn new things, or I have a hard time remembering things. If you can get your doctor to sign off on that, that is a very legitimate reason. And what we've seen over the last 16, 17 years doing this is things like memory issues, cognitive issues, where we can tie it to something specifically like a blood issue, a kidney function issue, a liver function issue as well. Those are some organs where if they're affected, it's going to affect your cognitive performance and your ability to memorize and recall facts on short notice. So it could be any other physical disability like that. Okay, so if there's something physical that's going on, or let's say that you're mute, you can't talk. Maybe that interferes with your ability to take the test if they can't make an appropriate accommodation. A developmental disability can be different. Let's say that you are a person who has a green card, but you have cerebral palsy. And because of your cerebral palsy, or any other condition, it could be Down syndrome, it could be anything. But if that interferes with your ability to comply with taking the civics test or to learn English and take the English test, those can be very legitimate reasons. And those are all things a doctor can sign off on. And you'll need either a clinical psychologist or a physician. Here we go. Specifically, they say this form must be completed by a licensed medical or osteopathic doctor or a licensed clinical psychologist. Okay. So you need a medical professional to be able to sign off on those so that it can be approved. Now, unfortunately, in the past, what we've seen, and I don't recall if this was under the previous Trump administration, it may have been before, where we had somebody in our local USCIS office who said, "Oh, you have this medical exemption." Well, how do you spell San Francisco? How do you say San Francisco? Read this word, and they show them San Francisco, which is a Spanish word. Oh man, I zoomed in. Let's do that again. There we go. And then they tried to judge on their own that they couldn't accept it because this person obviously didn't have a disability because they could read English. Well, that was false. We had to go back and fight that and overturn it. But expect to see more of that now, right? Expect to see more challenges to the medical exemptions. All right, so we talked about a physical or developmental disability or a mental impairment. Now, there are plenty of people with learning disabilities out there. And I've had many clients from Central and South America who have learning disabilities that aren't diagnosed until later in life. But they come to me and they say, "I don't know what's going on. I just can't learn English. I've lived here for 30 years or more. I've tried, but I can't remember any words. Or I can only remember a few of these words in English. And even though all my kids speak English and at work they've only spoken English, I can't learn it for some reason. It just doesn't stay in my head." Well, that's a cue for us to send them for an evaluation because they may have had a learning disability. And when we talk to them and say, "Hey, when you were in school, how long were you in school?" "Well, I was only in school till the 3rd grade." Okay. Or if they were in school longer, we may say, "How did you do in school?" "I was never good at school." Okay, that's another clue. Maybe there's like a legitimate learning disability. Only a licensed psychologist or mental health professional can let us know for sure. And it needs to be a medical doctor or clinical psychologist for purposes of this form. And if someone has that medical exemption, you can get a medical exemption for either the civics or the English or both. Usually we find that they're able to get both. Okay, so that's some of the exemptions that exist there. Let's see, other accommodations. Let's see, we got an exception here. If you're engaged in certain kinds of overseas employment, you may be eligible for an exception to the continuous residence requirement, right? Not really a topic for today, but just so you know, if you live overseas and work for the military or have a spouse who works for the military or federal government, one of the requirements for citizenship is that you live in the U.S. for a certain amount of time. That's worth talking about. Disability accommodations. So there are accommodations, like we talked about, if you have a disability, right? So if you need sign language, if you need to do something on a keyboard because you literally can't talk, they will make accommodations for that as well. But you need to list that on your application so that they're aware of that. Now, of course, regarding the oath of allegiance, we know there are exceptions for people with religious objections to, for example, service in the U.S. military. I know that there are some people of the Quaker faith, right? There's still Quakers out there. And others such as the Jehovah's Witnesses who have religious objections to serving in the armed forces under military direction or bearing arms in defense of the country, which is fine. There's exceptions for that. Not really part of the topic for today. But there are these exceptions and accommodations. Now, as we're talking, sorry, I guess I can show you, as we're talking about these exceptions and accommodations, I think what we're going to see is, and in the release, in the executive order, and in the USCIS's release and notes on this thing, I think we can actually go back here to the main page and read their announcement, but we can expect that there is going to be a tightening up of these requests for medical exemptions. It's not going to be so easy in the future to request these. So it needs to be more airtight. When we submit the petition for medical exemption, and you're going to need to be ready to fight that as well. So if the USCIS takes your medical exemption and says, oh, it says you have a learning disability, but we just don't believe it, we want to make you do it anyway, and we want you to do the test in English, even though your medical doctor says it's not really a possibility, you got to be prepared to fight. And we do that by filing appeals, and if necessary, going to federal court over the matter. Okay? And those can be fought and they can be won. So expect that to be tightening up a little more too. All right, now that we've discussed that, I want to just make sure I've got my other appropriate windows open here so I can see everything that's going on as we're going through the questions for today. If you're watching on Facebook or YouTube, please feel free to go ahead and throw your comments into the questions there. If you're joining us on TikTok, feel free to go ahead and throw your questions into the comments as well, or we could do a multi-guest thing. But these were the major updates for today, right? Because obtaining U.S. citizenship is one of the greatest benefits of the United States. You know, we are a society where we say, hey, under certain conditions, we will allow you to be one of us. And I'll sit through these ceremonies sometimes. I was there when my wife got her citizenship. I'm there when some of my clients get their citizenship. And I remember the last time when Trump was president the first time, you know, they sort of do this video where the president welcomes you to becoming a citizen. He essentially says something like, well, now you're one of us. We look after our own. I remember that. And in a real sense, that's what happens. I mean, when you become a U.S. citizen, you have the right to vote. You get a choice in who becomes president, who becomes governor of your state, who your congressional and Senate representatives are. You can serve on a jury. You can run for office yourself as a U.S. citizen who's naturalized. The only office you would not qualify for is a U.S. president. But we have plenty of immigrants, such as Arnold Schwarzenegger or Jennifer Granholm, who became governors of states, and they were not born here in the United States. So in that sense, American society is open, and that's what the founders wanted from the beginning. I mean, of course, when the founders founded the country, everybody was a British citizen or from some other place. You know, we had people hanging out here from France. We had people hanging out from some of the islands in the Caribbean. But they set a date and said, hey, as of this date, everyone in the U.S. is a U.S. citizen. And, you know, then they instituted rules and procedures for naturalizing as a U.S. citizen. Those are some of the things that are changing. And it's unfortunate to see that they're tightening up in a way that's a little more, that it excludes more people. Not great to see, not great to be aware of, but it is what's happening. So I want you to be aware of that out there in the internet's universe. All right, let's see here. I am saying hi. We're greeting people as they're joining here. We've been going for about 40, 45 minutes. We'll go a little bit longer if you have questions that I can answer. So if you are joining us on TikTok, go ahead and throw your questions in there. And let's see if we can do, okay, I sent an invite for the multi-guest thing. I'm assuming I'll see something pop up here if somebody wants to join that. So for those watching, I want to say thank you. We got a lot of people who've been jumping in and out of here. Citizenship, of course, a very important topic. We want everybody to be aware of that. And with all the changes that are happening in immigration recently, it is important to stay informed and stay on top of that. Let's just take a quick look here, see if any other questions are going to come in before we decide to close it for now. Okay, so I want to thank everyone for joining us today. Hey, share this with a friend. Share this with a family member. Share this with any of your friends who have questions about the U.S. citizenship process. Okay, and of course, I am attorney James Betzold. I am an immigration attorney. I've been practicing for over 15 years, and we've filed thousands of U.S. citizenship applications, helping our clients obtain the American dream and making that last final step to U.S. citizenship. Of course, once you become a U.S. citizen, you no longer have to renew a green card. You no longer have to worry about being removed from the United States. You will get your American passport. You can enter the United States. You can leave the United States for however long you want. When you leave the United States, you're entitled to the protection of the U.S. consulate in the country in which you are visiting. So there are some pretty amazing benefits that U.S. citizens do have. Again, running for office, voting for those who go to office, petitioning for family members, serving on a jury, etc. So if you're interested in that, please feel free to contact us here at visafeliz.com. I am Attorney James Betzold, and I hope you have a great day, and I hope that this information is helpful. Okay, if you're watching us on, let's go ahead and end